Well, hello church, it's already week 3. I hope you've been enjoying the Wellbeing Journey book, both individually and in a small group. This week we're going to be looking at emotions. Now this is something that we all experience, even myself from time to time. But there's a whole wide array of people watching this morning. You see, some are really passionate people. Some, believe it or not, actually cry whilst watching Marley and Me. And others are just ice cold. But wherever you fall on that made-up emotional spectrum, it's very, very easy to feel trapped in one or two emotions. And Sonia Hopkin right now is going to be preaching on how we can experience emotional freedom and peace.
Well, good morning, church, and thank you to Ian. How does he do that? Good morning, and as Ian said, my name is Sonia, and with my family, I'm part of the Kerith Blackwater Valley site and also the office team here at Kerith. We're in the middle of this series of looking together as a whole church family at God's plan for our well-being. Last week, Ben spoke to us about our physical well-being. I'm wondering, what small step did you take this week to improve your physical well-being? Well, today, our focus is on God's plan for our emotional well-being. Well, if there was ever a time for us to press into God's plan for that, it's now, isn't it? Midway through a third lockdown in the middle of a global pandemic. Today is the 31st of January, which means we did it, people. We got to the end of what might be the longest January ever on record. I don't know about you, but for me, it's felt like it's been about 6.5 years long. Well, while this series is split into different areas of our well-being, they're also interlinked, aren't they? Because God is interested in our whole well-being. And we can't fully separate the physical from the emotional, from the relational, and so on. We are fearfully and wonderfully made by our Creator, who is interested in every single part of us. Emotions play a really big part in our lives. I'm not going to have time this morning to cover every aspect or every different emotion that we feel, but I wonder if you've had chance yet to fill in those dials in the Wellbeing book that accompanies this series. Where are you on your emotional well-being dial? Are you full up? Now, to me, that doesn't mean you have to be happy or joyful all the time. I guess it could mean you have a good level of self-awareness, holding space for lament and space for joy, having healthy strategies in place to manage and express your emotions. Or perhaps you're somewhere in the middle of the dial. Or perhaps you feel like you're running on empty. Are you feeling hopeless? Maybe you're self-medicating to avoid and dull the pain of how you're really feeling. Perhaps you're turning to alcohol or food or spending hours on social media scrolling along to try and avoid your own troubles. Perhaps you're ignoring those who reach out. Maybe you're struggling to control feelings of anger, having a short temper or feeling impatient, reacting to situations in a way that far exceeds the situation that you face. You see, just like our body gives us a sign when there is a problem somewhere, our emotions do also. There are things to look out for when we aren't doing so well, things to take notice of and not to ignore. Now, a quick disclaimer, just like Ben did last week, I'm not a psychologist and I'm not a counsellor. I'm just a person like you who has found myself at various different places in that emotional well-being dial at different times in my life. And I don't have all the answers, but I know the one that does. God cares deeply for your emotional and mental well-being, just as much as any part of your life. Our amazing miracle worker, big picture God, he's also a detail God. He knows the number of hairs on my head. He knows my innermost thoughts and my feelings. His desire for me and for you is to walk in the freedom that he planned for us when he gave us Jesus. His desire is for us to live in the hope that comes through knowing him. So I'm wondering, church, how are you? No, how are you really? Now, if we were meeting together in person this morning at our various sites, physically together, we'd be passing one another, wouldn't we? And lots of, hey, how are you? Hey, yeah, I'm fine, thanks, I'm fine. Even if we weren't. It's our standard answer, isn't it? Sometimes it's true, of course. Sometimes we are fine. But we don't often reply with, actually, I'm really grumpy today, or, well, I'm feeling cross right now because of this. We don't even say, hey, well, I'm actually really happy and full of joy. No, there's this reluctance to share our emotions, even to those closest to us. Perhaps it's that British stiff upper lip or the pace of our lives that doesn't allow us space to do it, but we don't do it as much as we should. Before we go any further, let's look at the passage that I want to focus on this morning. 1 Kings chapter 19, starting at verse 1. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I've had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under that bush and fell asleep. Well, all at once, an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread, baked over hot coals, and a jar of water. He ate and drank, and then he lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he travelled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. Now, for those who may be joining us for the first time today, or perhaps just need a bit of a reminder, I want to provide some context of what's happened before that passage I've just read. King Ahab was on the throne, the latest in a line of kings who were really wicked, and both Ahab and his wife Jezebel were into some really dark things. Sexual rituals, child sacrifice, involvement with the occult, and killing of God's prophets. Instead of worshipping God, they worshipped the false idol of Baal. So Elijah had arrived on the scene declaring, well, of course, that this is all really wrong. The people of Israel and the prophets of Baal are summoned to Mount Carmel for a standoff to prove, well, who is worshipping the real God? Who is the one true God? The prophets of Baal, of course, don't get their requests answered from Baal because he doesn't exist. And Elijah invites God to send fire to the soaking wet altar, and he does, bringing victory and showing his power. Have a read of it in chapter 18 if you haven't already. It's dramatic and tense. It's also horrific in places with sacrifice, self-harm, and murder. It's quite traumatic to read, so I can't imagine how it must have been for Elijah actually being there during that. Victory, murder, what an emotional roller coaster he'd been on. Then Jezebel sends word to Elijah that he's going to be killed in the next 24 hours. He's gone from experiencing all that big stuff to intense fear for his own life. He's run away into the wilderness when he cries out to God, "I have had enough. Take my life." Now, Elijah may have been experiencing some sort of post-traumatic stress after what he's seen. Certainly a post-adrenaline come down arrives mixed in with fear, self-doubt, tiredness, and isolation. In that moment, Elijah isn't just feeling a bit sad or a bit low, is he? He wants his life to end. I wonder if you've ever crashed and burned like Elijah. His is, of course, very extreme, and his emotional ill health at this point has gone beyond feeling a bit sad or a bit low. He is experiencing mental health struggles, not seeing any purpose to his life, and no longer wanting to live. And I just want to say at this point, if you are listening to this right now and you feel that your life is worthless and that you have nothing to live for, that you would rather die, please do reach out to somebody right now. If you're watching live via our website, you can click the request prayer button. That will take you to a private space where someone will pray with you confidentially, and perhaps they can signpost you to other organisations, other services, counselling services that might be able to help you. Know that God loves you so very much. We love you, and he and so many people want you to live. I would expect, though, that for many of us, we won't have felt the extremity of what Elijah was feeling. But at the very least, we will have experienced going from highs to lows, sometimes within a day, sometimes within the same day. So those of you that know me know that I'm married to James. We live over in Farnborough with our 4 children. And if you know James, you know my husband is a kind, steady kind of guy. He's reliable. And when it comes to his emotions kind of go like this. A little bit like this. And he is just so blessed because he gets to share his life and home with me. And my emotions go a little bit more like this. Now, I was actually practicing this last night, and he asked me to point out that they don't do this. They kind of do this. So, there we go. It appears that I'm more emotional than him, and in many ways I am. But the reality is we both experience emotions. I just like expressing mine more often, perhaps. The degree to how we feel and how we respond will differ from person to person. But emotions are part of who we are. We feel joy when we hear good news, or we connect with someone, or do stuff that we enjoy doing. We feel sadness when someone says something to upset us. We feel righteous anger at injustices that we see around us. We sometimes feel anger over silly things that we don't need to feel angry about. And sometimes our emotional state stays pretty neutral. Circumstances in life can trigger certain emotions in us. Being overworked and not taking the time to rest and restore. Facing lots of change that is out of our control. People hurting us and disappointing us. Fear of the future. Concern for ourselves or for our loved ones. And sometimes those emotions can affect our mental health, and we can find ourselves spiraling to a place where we don't want to be. And sometimes there may not actually be nothing wrong in our lives, but a chemical imbalance in our brain can cause us to have mental ill health. When we consider the times that we're currently living in, we've all been on what I've heard called several times the corona coaster. Our lives have been turned upside down and beyond our control on more than one occasion. We may have felt fearful or concerned for our loved ones. Well, the 6.5 long month of January has come to an end, and for me it's been quite an intense one actually. Last week I started to feel a bit overwhelmed, and the irony that I was preparing a preach for today on emotional well-being was not lost on me. And so when trusted people asked me how I was, I thought, I'm not just going to say, I'm fine, thanks. I told them how I really felt, and that actually I was finding things a bit hard right now. Now, a few years ago, I would not have shared so easily. I would have responded with, I'm fine. You're going to see a photo on the screen now. Don't I look happy in this photo? About an hour before the photo was taken, I had what I now know to be a panic attack. I'd never had one before, and I've never had one since. I look like I'm fine, I look happy, but inside I was feeling so overwhelmed. But actually, my life circumstances were great. I had a warm and safe home, a fantastic husband, kids, a job I loved, a wonderful church community, amazing friends, but my emotional wellness was running on empty. Because it doesn't always matter, you see, what our circumstances are. Things can be seemingly fine on the outside, but inside you may feel like you're unraveling. Or, from the other point of view, think of the Apostle Paul. He writes to the Philippians and tells them to rejoice always. And he's writing that from a prison cell, not the best of circumstances. And it doesn't always make much sense that our emotional well-being isn't always linked to our circumstances, but Jesus wants to help us try and make sense of it all. The panic attack I had that day was the prompt I needed to speak to a couple of trusted friends and then a counsellor about how I was truly feeling. I was honest with her, and more importantly, I was honest with God. I'd put off getting help for myself for a long, long time. I guess part of me felt it was a sign of weakness. Well, let me tell you what an absolute load of rubbish that is. I realised the strength there is to be found in vulnerability. I dealt in counselling with some underlying issues. I rested. I did more of the things that brought me joy. I took antidepressants for a few months to help me get back on track, just as I would take antibiotics if I had an infection. I kept a list of what I was grateful for. I tried to do what Paul says and rejoice at all times, practicing gratitude, even when I wasn't feeling it. Now, I'm glad to say God healed me, and I'm now far better equipped to deal with things when curveballs come. And some of you will never have an experience like that, or some of you will have your own unique stories. Everyone's life experience is different, but I know that through Elijah's story, we can see how God values our emotional well-being. Elijah is running away out of fear. What are you scared of? Why don't you write in the chat the kind of things that you get a bit scared of? For me, it's spiders. Don't worry, there won't be a photo of a spider on the screen this morning. I think I must have watched, I watched Arachnophobia when I was about 11 or 12 years old, the movie, and from then on, I was really scared of spiders. And I know that's unfair, they get a bad press, they're not doing anything wrong, but I am scared of them. But there's one thing being scared of something, and it's a whole nother level, feeling fearful. Because, church, fear tricks us. Fear deceives us. It creates confusion, makes us want to run and hide, like Elijah. Fear also makes us lose sight of hope. It's true that if we shift our outlook and mindset, we can choose a different option. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, Paul says, "For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." And again, in Romans 12, we read that we can be transformed by the renewing of our minds. Now, choosing faith and hope over fear is something we can train and renew our minds to do with God's help. Absorbing biblical truth, standing on his promises, reading of the countless times he has never failed us, never left his people, knowing that he's here for us, knowing that Jesus died for us and his Holy Spirit is with us. We can shift our internal dialogue to overcome the fear with our knowledge and hope of what is yet to come. Now, I do want to acknowledge that for people who have experienced trauma in their lives or who have a specific diagnosis, it's not as an easy a thing as just waking up one day and deciding to do that. And for you, I'd encourage you to get both prayer and professional help. Inviting God to sit with you in your fear may be the one thing and the bravest thing you can do right now. But for many of us, we can retrain our thinking. We can turn our what ifs to our even if. Let me explain that. What if is said from a place of fear. What if my child falls up off the large tree that they're climbing? What if I end up losing my job because of this pandemic? Well, even if says, even if these things happen, God loves me and God is in control. Even this morning, I was feeling kind of fearful about speaking to you this morning. And I was like, what if I stumble over my words? What if I trip over on the stage? Well, even if says that even if I do that, we are a family that love one another. And more than that, God loves me. Even if says that his promises never fail. He loves me. He has a plan for me. I have a hope of a brighter future. Ultimately, an eternity with Jesus. Our current what-ifs are suddenly not so big in comparison to the certainty of our even if. Even if is grounded on hope. We're going to watch a little clip now from the psychologist Dr. Roger Bretherton talking about hope.
Okay, when life is not going so well, and you just feel just bleak, and you know, you're just losing kind of hope, what can we do?
Well, I like the fact that you said losing hope, because weirdly, hope is the very thing we need to pick up in moments where things feel bleak. Okay. So that's the weird thing about hope, that hope kind of comes into play in the very moments where you feel a bit despairing and a bit hopeless. Right. And the research seems to suggest that hopeful people believe four things. Basically, they believe that the future is better, that we have to bring that about in some way, that you and I have a contribution to bringing about that better future. Yeah. There's loads of ways of getting there, so get really creative. What are all the different ways that you can make today better? Right. But then fourthly, all those ways are going to involve frustration, difficulty, effort in some way. Yeah. So that's what makes hope different from optimism. So optimism is waking up and going, I feel a bit bad, but today's going to be better. Hope is, I'm actually going to work and be quite strategic today about bringing about that better world.
Okay, so give me just something really practical that I could really put kind of being grateful and that sense of hope into practice.
Yeah. So one of the best ways of practicing hope is actually to think about how can you bridge between what you're doing today and where that's going to lead you in the future. So this works in all kinds of contexts. Hope bridges from, I'm doing this right now, but what I want to imagine is what happens when this finishes. When this is done, what's that going to be like? What will this living room be like when I've finally finished decorating it? What will work be like when I've finally got this bit of paperwork off the table? What will this relationship be like when we finally sort out some of the stuff we're working through at the moment? So that's one really good way of using hope, is actually to project ourselves into the future.
Nice, I really like that.
Well, we can choose hope. Choose hope as our bridge from today to a brighter future. We have a God who can heal. We have a God who will never leave us. We have the ultimate hope in an eternity spent with Jesus. When we face situations that knock us emotionally, we can have the confidence that our future is going to be better. Let's get back to Elijah before we close today, and what we can learn both from him and from God's treatment of him, how God responds to him. What about his story helps us to find freedom and hope in our own emotional well-being? Well, Elijah, he cries out to God. How often do you really tell God how you're feeling? I love how all through the Bible we see people truly sharing how they feel. We know that talking therapy helps people. I said earlier it helped me. But we have the ultimate counselor when it comes to God. We talk in Kerith Kids in terms of Jesus being our very best friend, our forever friend. Well, this doesn't stop when we move into youth or we move into adulthood. He's still our best friend, right? We can still tell him stuff that we wouldn't tell our earthly best friends. We can cry out to him and be truly honest with him. Sometimes we respond with an "I'm fine," even when we're not, as a form of self-preservation, don't we? But if that's you, I challenge you, be more like Elijah. Confess it and don't suppress it. Bring it to God. He's literally heard it all before. Elijah doesn't hold back. David often swings from joy to jealousy to despair within the same psalm. Even Jesus, who's fully God and fully man, experiences different emotional responses at times. He doesn't hold back when he cries out to God in the Garden of Gethsemane and again on the cross. We don't need to pretend or keep anything from God. Elijah cries out to God, but he also stops and rests. He's been working really hard in this public-facing role, all eyes on him, speaking out against evil and injustice. And now it's time to stop, take a break, and rest. Straight away after crying out to God, he falls asleep. And God allows him to rest. He doesn't jump in and invalidate his feelings with, "Come on, Elijah, you're fine. Up you get, stop complaining. Come on, don't make a fuss." No, he doesn't rebuke him and tell him that a leader like him, one of his people, shouldn't be saying such things. He doesn't play comparison like we maybe do with one another. When we hear someone, we might think, you're feeling like that. God doesn't say to him, "You're feeling like that, you should try being me." No, of course he doesn't. God listens and then he allows him to fall asleep. Rest is such a key part of all of our well-being. It's important, and it's annoying when you're young, when your parents say to you, "Oh, everything will feel better, you just need an early night." But then you get to a certain age and you kind of realize that's actually quite true. Looking after our physical health actually helps feed our emotional health. God's design for Sabbath was for a reason. Sure, we need to work hard. Let's work hard, but let's rest well. Obviously, there's sleep involved in that, and sometimes it means doing things that bring us joy, doing things that delight us. I wonder, what can you do this week that delights you? What can you do that brings you joy? God then shows Elijah simple and practical kindness by looking after his physical needs with food and water, strengthening his body, helping to strengthen his mind. And in that, God ensures that he isn't alone by using an angel to bring this meal to him. You see, God doesn't ever want us to do this journey on our own. God made us to be in relationship. He designed us to be in community with others. In his time of emotional and mental breakdown, Elijah is not alone. He tried to be alone, though. Did you clock that? He sent his servant away. And I think this is a really common trait of people who aren't doing so well emotionally. People often isolate themselves away from others to go it alone. And of course, this might be needed for a short while, especially if you're an introvert. All the introverts out there, say hi. You know, we sometimes need, as introverts, time to recharge away from others. But it isn't God's intention for us to stay like that, to stay alone. In these times that we're living in, more than ever, we're isolated from each other, and we need to make more of an effort to reach out to one another. Perhaps you've been listening this morning and thinking, well, Sonia, my emotional wellness dial is actually full. I'd say to you, perhaps now is the time for you to be someone else's angel. Allow God to use you to come close to someone. Allow God to use you to show kindness. Ask him to nudge you with a name or two who you could reach out to. Send them a message, arrange a FaceTime with them or a Zoom call. Send a card or a meal, offer practical help. It is challenging at the moment. We're limited in a sense of what we can and can't do. But there are still simple acts of kindness we can do for other people. I've been the recipient of these, and it gives you such a lift when it happens. If you're feeling isolated, remember the strength that I said earlier I had found in vulnerability. Saying I'm not okay is a powerful thing. Reach out to someone. There's such a sweet place of healing to be found when we are authentic with those around us. The last thing that stands out to me from this passage is how God gives Elijah time. He repeats that process of rest, angel food. He gives him time to strengthen for the next stage in his life because he's still got plans for him. He's got plans for me and he's got plans for you. He gives Elijah time to rest, recover, time to find that hope again. God deeply loved Elijah and he deeply loves us. He gave us Jesus. There is no greater love than what he did for us. And Jesus is that bridge Roger talked about, that bridge of hope from today to a brighter future. Whatever our circumstances are, he joins us in them. Even when we're still doing well, even when our emotional tanks are full, we still have the hope of an even brighter future one day with him, far greater than we can imagine on earth. The same God of the fire and the big picture stuff and the miracles, that same God of the high moments, he's also the same God of our quiet, still, even sometimes low moments. If your tank is running on empty, please know that it doesn't have to stay that way. God wants to heal you. That might happen instantly. That might take some time. We can learn from Elijah's breakdown, and we can find emotional wellness again. We can find freedom in the one who brings us this hope. There's nothing too big for him, nothing he can't listen to, nothing we can't overcome with his help.